There you are. Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
You weren't responding. I was asking, can you
Hold
hear
up, my
me?
volume's not up.
Huh?
What?
I was asking you if you could hear me and you weren't answering.
Still can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hello? Not working?
My volume's all the way up and the TV's volume's all the way up.
It could then mean that this thing is dead. It's unfortunate. Emma.
Still can't hear you. Are you doing a new microphone? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So I have to be all the way down here. Is that what it's saying? Let's do
How about now? Can you hear me now? Woo. Yep.
Yeah.
Good. I switched microphones so I can hopefully stand and talk. I don't have to be right next to the computer. My normal microphone died on me. I need a new battery. I don't know if we have it at home.
Try talking again.
You hear me?
Okay. I'm trying to get you going through the TV speakers because I have you up on the TV.
Ooh, fun. All right, so I'm looking at the battery, which I believe is dead. Test it when we get back. When I get back up there. Also, I'll need to check, see if I have a replacement for it. Might actually have replacement for that battery. I think I bought a bunch when I got this. You can still hear me well?
I can still hear you well. I can hear you. I'm hearing you through my computer though.
Click on the audio.
It's on output music for live second TV, which is what it's called. No.
You tell whoever that is.
It's just output. Output, TV, AirPlay. And I'm still hearing the sound through the computer, which is fine. The sound is fine. It's just weird because I'd see you on the TV and hear the sound of the computer. Mm-hmm.
Gotta be what it is. Actually. Yeah. Ah. You created the whiteboard. Why?
Because I didn't know it was a feature until now. You should use it.
I don't need it.
Well, sometimes when you're trying to explain something, it might be beneficial to visual learners like moi.
Well, that's why you have a worksheet.
That's not really visual. Unless you have an image on it or an explanation of something on it. Usually you just have the questions and answers.
I don't have answers on there.
I mean, questions.
Yep. Don't think I have anything for you yet. Visualize.
You need to go in your kennel,
Ooh,
knock it off.
Is it Remus?
Yes. I smell like salmon, so he's growling at the dogs. Oh, Sweetie had one of his toys. Naughty Remus. Naughty. He wasn't even playing with it.
Oh, did you see that the salmon had skin on it still?
Yep, it was good. Thank you. There we go. That is what I wanted to do. Although I still am not sure how to get the sound onto the TV, but it's fine.
I don't know either. Other than to plug it in directly to the TV.
I doubt that because I can do everything else.
You doubt that by plugging it into the TV, you'd get sound?
Well, I mean, yeah, probably like with that HDMI. I'm just saying,
I'd be able to get it.
yeah, I'm just saying there's easier ways. Yeah, he agrees with me. Did you see his high five?
Yes, I did.
I got his high five. You got his foot feet in his mouth, which I was super sad I missed.
It was barely in there. He got maybe one nibble on it.
But still, it's
And I
a
bet
thing.
he caught it anyway.
He just needs to roll over on both ways.
Yep.
April's babies already do that. We gotta do more tummy time.
Yep. I was going to, and then it was time for me to make dinner. That took forever.
There's not a really good spot for tummy time in the living room because of the dogs.
Yep, that's why I do it in the nursery.
Yeah, I know. I just don't go up to the nursery as much as I should. They said they were picking something up and they'll be there soon, but she said that. Well, they should be home soon, because it was about 20 minutes ago. I told her we have an electric scooter if she still needs a car.
Yeah, I don't know if that's gonna work.
She said I laughed picturing me trying the boys to the fenders, or tying the boys to the fenders.
Yeah. It's that, and also on top of the fact that it's got a very short battery life if you're using it a lot.
It would get me to school though, right? If there's a dire emergency.
I believe so. I'd have to double check the mileage. Cause it can go, I think it's. What was it, 13 hours or 7 miles?
Can't be 7 miles.
Is it bad?
Because it was more expensive than that.
I'd have to double check it. It's on the manual. I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna check something real quick.
Well, hurry up, they'll be here soon.
Mm-hmm.
Beep, beep. Oh. Oh, 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 oh. Hey, 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 hey. You can do it, roll onto your back. 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 You can do it, you can do it. You can do it. Woo! Like that, and like this, and like this, and like this. And like this. And like this. You never learned to your back. And I guess we should do it in a spot where it's a little bit cleaner.
So sorry.
You're okay.
You want to say hi?
Hi, Pastor.
Hi, guys.
All right, go over there. We are up and ready whenever you are.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay.
So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another, finally, midweek Bible class on The Chosen, looking at episode 7 of season 4. So just to help us remember what has happened in this past episode, let's go through it real quick. So this is the morning after Jesus gave a sermon in the temple that didn't go over very well with the people there. The Pharisees didn't like it, and so they tried to stone him because he had claimed to be God. And so the disciples had to flee for their lives with Jesus. Big James got injured, and everyone is sort of trying to take care of him when they find out that John the Baptist, or not, that Lazarus has died. And so Jesus says, we're going to go back. And that's the morning that they are waking up to and getting ready for this journey back into Judea in order to mourn with Jesus. Except he had said something interesting, that we are going to go wake Lazarus up. And so now everyone is sort of struggling with what Jesus means. Is he saying that he is going to raise Lazarus from the dead? They aren't sure. Mary sums it up well: either we're going to sit Shiva or we won't. One of those two things is going to happen. They just don't know which one until they get there. And so everyone is sort of debating about things on the road, talking about things, trying to figure things out. It's just, they aren't getting it yet. And they finally get close, and people report to Mary and Martha that there's a group of people coming, and they realize that it is Jesus and his disciples. So Martha runs out to go and meet Jesus, and she says, Lord, if you had been here sooner, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you anything you ask for. And Jesus says, well, your brother will live again on the last day. And she says, yes, I know that, but that's not soon enough for what I would like. And Jesus says, well, I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me will live even though he dies, and anyone who lives and believes in me will never die. She again repeats, I know that anything you ask, God will give it to you because you are the Christ. And then he sends her to go get Mary. Mary comes out and says the exact same thing, except this time Jesus just says, show me the tomb. Show me where he is buried. And before they can go, Jesus begins to weep. And this is the first time that he has really shown a lot of public emotion like this. And it surprises the disciples, and they all head off to the tomb, thinking they're just going there to mourn. But then Jesus tells his disciples to roll away the stone. And despite everyone's objection, they eventually listen to him, roll away the stone. And everyone's starting to realize what's about to happen. And Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And they go ahead and they unwrap him. And he goes back home because he is hungry, he is smelly, and he just needs to be taken care of at this moment, having been dead for 4 whole days. And so they go off, and Thomas now is in for just a rude awakening of the fact that Jesus can raise people from the dead, and yet didn't choose to raise Rama from the dead. And so he is questioning why Jesus did this for Lazarus, but not for him. And Jesus says, you're not going to understand the answer until you really wait a little bit longer. You got to wait and see and understand, but I can't give you that answer right now. But know that if you stick with me, you will get that answer and you will accept it and be okay with it. You're not going to leave me after you figure out what the answer is. You're going to figure it out and you're going to want to stick with me even after that. And then Jesus goes back. Well, he talks with some men who say that the Sadducees who are here have now gone back to a report in Jerusalem, and is going to mean bad news for Jesus. And Jesus says, I know, that's why I did this, so that things can get started here. And then he goes back to the house and he starts talking with Lazarus and explains what all happened. That he had heard about Lazarus's sickness almost 4 days ago and chose not to come and save him because he needed him to die in order to be able to bring him back. Lazarus is like, I'm not fully understanding why, but hey, that's okay. And he goes, well, you're not the only one. My disciples aren't understanding what's going on here. And that frustrates me. That makes me angry with them. And they have a discussion about what is Jesus trying to say with all this. And he explains, this is my last sign. Starting the next few days, I'm going to be heading down to the purpose that I have been sent here for, and that is to eventually be crucified and die for everyone's sins. And they have a discussion about that. Lazarus still struggles to understand it because he's like, this just doesn't make sense. You're just the guy that I am friends with. It's hard to wrap it all up in his mind, but he trusts Jesus and says that he knows that he's going to do what's best, and his disciples will eventually figure all that out. And they hear the racket of Thomas being angry with Jesus at this point, throwing things and just being just mad at Jesus. And Jesus obviously lets him cool off before he tries to even speak with him. And the other disciples try and cool Thomas off, but it's not working. And he eventually goes off. And Peter points out that, hey, Jesus says that no one can snatch those who belong to him out of his hand. And Judas says, well, he says that about the true sheep. What if Thomas is not? And it really creates more tension. And finally, they all decide they just need to get some rest after a crazy couple of days. And so they go off to sleep and to wait for the next day. And that's how the episode ends. Are there any scenes or topics from the episode that people would like me to touch on before we actually jump in to our lesson this evening?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Well, then let's I've sent out now the worksheet that goes along with what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going through one that's actually the bulk of what we went through, and some things that were sort of in the background that I think are actually kind of important to discuss in full. We're going to talk about Psalm 90, which is the psalm that Little James was referencing on their walk from where they were on the other side of Jordan to Bethany, and then also Isaiah 53, the suffering servant section. Talking about that because Jesus saying, hey, you all should have realized what was going to happen. It was what Isaiah was talking about. And it should prepare everybody for what's about to happen to Jesus. No one should be surprised what happens next. But first, we're going to go through the raising of Lazarus, found in John chapter 11. So I will read this. So from John chapter 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." All right. So looking back at verse 1, what does verse 1 suggest about the relationship between Lazarus, Mary, Martha, and Jesus?
Good friends.
Yeah. He knew them by name. He knew who they were. And if we look at verse 5, it says that he loved them. So he knew them well enough. Now, what does Jesus do when he hears that Lazarus is sick?
He waits and says that the sickness will not end in death.
Yeah, he says the sickness will not end in death and decides to stay where he is for 2 days. Now, after staying where he was for those 2 days, what did Jesus say he wanted to do?
Is that the part where he says, let's go back to Judea?
Yeah, he says, let's just go back to Judea. He doesn't really give an explanation as to why they're going back. He just says, let's go back to Judea. Look back at verse, where is it?
The end of verse 7.
At the end of verse 7, he just says, let us go back to Judea. He does not clarify any more than that. And then how does his disciples respond?
They were trying to warn him because the last time they were there, they were stoned or
Yeah,
tried to be stoned. Yep.
yeah, the people tried to stone him last time he was there. Why would he want to go back there? And then he finally explains, well, Lazarus has fallen asleep and we're going to go and wake him up. The disciples were like, well, Jesus, if he's sleeping, he's going to get better, right? And Jesus goes, no. He has died. And so then they go, okay, well, then we'll go back with you. And what does Thomas say to the disciples when Jesus explains exactly what they are going to Judea to do?
Are you talking about the part where he says, let us go that we may die with him?
Yeah, he says, let us go that we may die with him.
I realized that I was
What?
gonna say kind of not what he said in the verses, but what he said in the movie, or sorry, in the episode, where he kind of brought it back to his situation with can't remember the girl's name who passed away. Rama, yeah, with Rama. He kind of like compared the situation to that. Like he was doubting that anything would come from it.
Right, which is kind of why I'm confused. I mean, I know obviously the TV show is just the TV show, and I know they had to give him, some reason, but why would he say that? Because in the Bible, it sounds like he's just depressed, and I don't know why he would say that.
Not necessarily.
Well, could Thomas have also been a good friend of Lazarus?
Could have been. We don't know much about that, other than we know what Jesus' relationship was with them. However, we have to remember, what did the disciples believe that Jesus was here to do?
Like raise up an army against their captor, or not the authorities against them.
Yep. And so, if Jesus wanted to go to Judea and there was a threat against his life, what might he be thinking they're going to do?
He meaning Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess the idea is they're going to go and they're going to die in the battle. And maybe he's thinking that.
Yep. Either right now he might be going, this is a little early for doing this, but all right, Jesus, you say that we're going to go down to Judea. Well, I believe that we're going to go there. We're going to take it, but let us go that we may die with him and that we may die fighting for the Messiah. Will go down in history. But then they're on their way to Bethany and they get there, and just before they get to the village, actually, who came to meet Jesus when the sisters heard that Jesus was coming?
Martha?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say Martha. You were saying sisters, so I didn't know if you wanted somebody other than
Yeah.
the sisters.
Oh, it was the two sisters.
Yeah, just Martha then. Yeah.
Who actually went to go and see Jesus? Martha. There's a reason I wanted to bring this up. Why is it kind of ironic that Martha was the one who went out to Jesus?
What? Well, I don't know. I think that she's like the older sister, so maybe to protect her younger sister Mary from
Yeah,
whatever Jesus was going to tell her.
yeah. But I'm also talking about what other story of Mary and Martha have we heard that makes it kind of interesting that Martha was the one who went out first to meet Jesus.
So Eric was saying the idea that, in the first story, Martha was the one doing all the work and Mary was sitting around listening to Jesus, and now tables are turned where Martha is the one to run to Jesus first.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's almost like a role reversal in there. In the first story that we hear of Mary and Martha, Martha's getting the house all ready for Jesus while he's there trying to serve him, while Mary's just sitting there listening to him teach. It's almost as if she learned her lesson that Jesus was teaching her at that point. And so when she heard he was coming, she immediately was like, I want to hear what he has to say. But why wasn't he here sooner? And what is his plans now that he is here? So let's look actually at the conversation between Jesus and Martha in verses 21 to verse 27. Just look at those verses. Really look at what Martha says and what Jesus says. Answer this question. Does Martha understand what Jesus is about to do?
No.
Why do you say no?
Because she's confusing it with the resurrection, meaning in the, at the last days. She doesn't understand that he's going to do it like now.
But at the same time, she's also like, God, it's your will. You'll do what is good. But she also, so she's kind of conflicted. Almost like she doesn't think he's gonna do anything because, well, Lazarus is dead. But she's also like, oh, but I have faith in you, and I
Mhm.
know that he'll rise on the last day.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think she figures that out when he keeps going, but like in the very beginning is when he says your brother will rise again. She's like, yeah, I know he will in the last days. So,
It's you see a sort of roller coaster between this two reactions. Yes, I believe that Jesus, you can raise him from the dead. I believe you can. Because right away in verse 22, she says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask for. Even if you ask for him to raise Lazarus from the dead, I know God will give that to you. And then it says, hey, do you know that your brother's going to rise again? And she immediately goes from, yes, I believe that you can raise him from the dead today, to, well, I know he's going to rise again in the last day. And then he goes, well, I'm the resurrection and life. And she goes, yes, Lord, that is who you are. I do believe you still can do it even today, but I don't think you're going to do it today. It's almost as if she's like, I know you can do it. I know it's probably going to be in the future, but I don't think you're going to do it today. So she's left with this, I don't know what's going to happen.
well, and I mean, it's kind of interesting to me because I guess I don't know, it's awfully bold, I think, of the sisters to kind of put that expectation on Jesus, because what makes their brother any more special than anybody else who dies? So, I mean, I get it that they were friends or whatever, but to put that on them and say it's your fault he died, well, because you weren't here. I don't know, it's just awfully bold of them to say that.
Yeah, it is a very bold thing. We've
That's a good
seen
point.
both sisters say it. What was that, Emma?
I was just agreeing. That's a good point.
Yeah, it is bold. Just Jesus just gets there. Martha, the first thing she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Mary says the same thing when she gets out there. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Very bold things to be saying. But does that statement also show an amount of faith that the two have?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they believe, okay, Lazarus was very sick, which ultimately led to his death. But if Jesus had been here before he died, Jesus could have saved him and he would not have died. They believe that that is in fact possible. They're asking him, really, the question is, where have you been? Why did it take so long for you to get here? You heard that he was sick 4 days ago, and now you're here? What's been going on, Jesus? What happened? Why did it take so long for you to get here? Why did
The
you?
part where I'm like, his ways are higher than your ways.
Yeah, exactly.
He had a reason.
There is a reason behind it, and they're just like, we don't get it. We don't understand it. We don't know what's going on. But we're going to see that Jesus does give them an answer. But it's a little bit later on that he doesn't. So what happens to Jesus after he speaks with Mary? So Martha goes back, tells Mary that Jesus wants to see her. So she comes running out to see him, says the same thing as Martha without saying that God can give you whatever you ask of him. She just puts it out there. If you had been here, he would not have died. What does Jesus do after speaking with Mary, telling her to take him to the tomb?
The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept.
Yes, Jesus
Which is
wept.
interesting because if he knows he's going to resurrect him, I don't know why he's weeping.
Yep.
Unless he's weeping at the fact that his sisters are so sad.
Well,
Yep.
I think he's weeping at the fact that Lazarus was dead in general. Yes, he knew
But
what
he
was
knows he's going to come back. So
right.
Yes, he does. He knows he's going to come back. However, one thing that people often point out is answering this question, is death what God had intended in the first place?
no,
Also, Jesus was doing God's will, so is there a chance that that was his human side that was weeping? The
Well,
human
yeah,
side
this is one verse we point to saying, hey, this shows that Jesus is human. He has a human connection to Lazarus, and even though he knows what's going to happen, this sorrow does overwhelm him. But it's also because we point out that death isn't the way things were meant to be. Jesus isn't just weeping at the death of his dear friend Lazarus, but he's also weeping at the fact that this had to happen at all. If things had gone the way God had intended them to be at the beginning of creation, where Adam and Eve obey him for the rest of their lives, he would have told them, hey, go and eat from the tree of life and never die. In which case, none of us would die. Death was not a part of God's original plan with everyone staying, what God intended for his plan to be, to keep everyone out of sin. But when sin entered the world, death came through sin.
well, and the interesting thing, and I don't know if this is just completely guessing, he wept because now, of course, his upcoming sacrifice is necessary.
Yeah, yes, you also have on top of that all the things that are really piling up on Jesus, which the episode does kind of show, and ultimately when with the talk at the end with Lazarus, he's confessing, saying, hey, it's kind of starting soon here. We're gonna spend the night here, and then I'm going to Jerusalem. And you know what's gonna happen when I go there. They're gonna put me to death. That's gonna happen to me. It's right around the corner. And that is also sticking with the biblical text, what happens in the next few chapters of John. I believe John chapter 11 ends with Judas betraying Jesus, I believe. And then right away we get into Palm Sunday, I believe. See, raised Lazarus from the dead. they decide that they're going to arrest him, wait until Passover is done. And then in chapter 12, the anointing at Bethany, which is 6 days before Passover, which is when Jesus would be put to death. And then Palm Sunday happens in chapter 12. So it is happening exactly as the episode is showing. It's 6 days before Passover, the following day. So episode 8 will begin really 6 days before Passover, which is that Sunday, which is Palm Sunday. All right. But now, how long had Lazarus been in the tomb?
Four days.
Yep, he'd been in there for 4 days. And Jesus still is able to raise him from the dead.
I was gonna say a lot enough to stink it up, but I have to go like back and forth to unmute myself since it's off the TV. Sorry.
I know. It's so funny because I was like, I try to make sure I'm not the only one answering questions, but then I feel weird when it just like there's a lull and nobody answers, and so I'm like, 4 days.
Nope, that's me. I have it so that I can hit the space bar, but then when I need to scroll on the worksheet, I can't do that.
Oh, gotcha.
And I've also got baby and he needs diapers.
Yeah.
So we're good.
No, I
I've
know.
got it. I'm answering, I promise.
It was funny though when you're like long enough to stink it up, and I was like, well, that's how it goes.
Yep, yep, definitely. Now, and this is where we see Jesus actually finally getting an answer for Mary and Martha. They are been wondering why Jesus takes so long to get here. And Jesus says a prayer right before he raises Lazarus. And why does Jesus say a prayer before he raises Lazarus?
I would imagine it's to show that the power is coming from God because he's still in his human humbled state. Not saying that, I mean, Jesus does talk about power leaving his body when the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years touched him. So it's not like he doesn't have the power, but
Yep.
right now it's coming from the Father.
Yeah, exactly. He is showing his connection, his close relationship with the Father, showing that the power is coming from God. But he also says, it's not for me that I say this, but it is for whom? Who did he say the prayer for?
Everyone else.
Yeah, everyone else is here so that they may believe that you sent me. That's the reason he waited as long as he did, so that you may believe that God sent me. That's why he said the prayer out loud, so that you may believe that God sent me. Are there any other questions about John chapter 11?
Nope.
Gideon has a question, but I can't tell what he's trying to say.
Uh,
Can you speak a little louder? Oh, okay, now he's shy.
Okay. Well, then we're gonna talk about about Psalm 90. I believe this is the one that was being referred to by little James, because it talks about the sleep of death. And it asks God questions about all of this, and then it has sort of a hopeful ending. It starts out pretty rough, and then it ends on a hopeful note.
And are you saying that they portray this one in the movie or in the TV show?
Little James references it. He's talking about with Mary about what Jesus was saying about how he's going to go and wake Lazarus up, but that Lazarus was dead. And so this whole idea of we're either going to sit Shiva or not. So he's trying to figure out and understand this. And then he talks about in the Psalms, there's a line that talks about the sleep of death. And he goes, so from God's perspective, death is just sleep. And that's kind of an interesting thought for him to be thinking about as they're heading on to Lazarus, because is Jesus saying what he thinks he says? Because there are only 3 disciples who know about Jesus raising anyone from the dead. So now the rest of them are trying to wrestle with the concept of that idea that could.
And it does seem like Mary and little James do seem to pick up on these things more than the other people who are quick to react. Mary is being portrayed, and I don't know how much, like, her character is being portrayed as very observant, quietly just observing and actually learning the lessons a little faster than the others, and same with little James.
Yep, and I think they give a very good reason for that in their
Was
conversation.
in paused.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I think it gives them, they have a very good explanation. Little James has his ailment that is slowing him down, and Mary has her past that she has to confront and deal with on a daily basis. Even though things are better, she still feels that weight of it still sitting in the back, occasionally peeking through every once in a while, as she says, where it's mostly all light now, whereas it was darkness with a little bit of light. Now it's all light with an occasional peeking of darkness. And so they just are a little more perspective. They have a little more perspective on what they're seeing and what Jesus is saying. And that's why he's pointing out this psalm talking about the sleep of death, going, well, if Jesus is who he says he is, and death is like sleep according to Moses here, according to God, well then, does that mean he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead? Is that what he's saying? So let's read Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years, or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord, how long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands, O Lord, of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. All right, so looking at verse 1, what does Moses call the Lord?
This psalm would still be one from David, right?
Nope, this is from Moses.
This is from who?
Moses.
Moses. Okay.
Yep, Moses wrote 2, I think, Psalms.
And this is one of them?
Yes.
And then David wrote the rest?
No.
Oh, I thought David wrote the Psalms.
He wrote a majority of them.
Oh, okay. So this one's from
The
Moses.
next person who's written the most are the sons of Asaph. They've written a number, then Solomon writes a few, a couple are written by Moses, and then the rest are anonymous. Some of them
Okay.
we know were written by David simply because of psalms that are written in other places in the Bible that David had written that are exactly the same as the ones in the Psalms, but he doesn't put in on the top. There's no title on the top.
The reason why I was asking is because Eric asked after you had finished reading it, so that's why I just wanted to find out.
This
So
one is maybe the one and only of Moses. I think he has written two, but I'd have to look at, I'd have to consult my books on that to figure out how many exactly were written by Moses. Yeah, this is one of
your
Moses.
question was the first one there. What does Moses call the Lord? Was that your question?
Yes, yep,
Okay.
verse 1.
Our dwelling place throughout all generations.
Yeah, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. And again, since we're talking about it being Moses, what's interesting about it that Moses calls God their dwelling place.
Does this have something to do with like that he was the leader of the Israelites and God was their dwelling place within the altar, not the altar, the temple?
Yep, and where was Moses and the people of Israel?
I would say for a nomadic people, this was probably very important since they
Yeah.
didn't have a home, at this time of Moses and everything else. So to say, Lord, you are our dwelling place is like in all this chaos and uncertainty, we have you.
Yep, exactly. That's the point I'm trying to
That's a
get.
good point. Yeah, because they were they were banished basically at this point.
Yeah, they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They were told, here's your home, but you're not allowed to go in there because you've disobeyed me enough times that I'm going to have this entire generation die. The next generation, they will go in there. And they're wandering in there. And Moses says, Lord, you are our dwelling place because we have no home right now, but you are our one steadfast, sure place of rest. You are our dwelling place. And then look at verses 2 to 4. What point are verses 2 to 4 making about the Lord and mortals?
Okay, so mortals, obviously, in this sounds like, there is an end. We have a built-in expiration. What is interesting, and I would say taking this sentence or, verse 3 out of context, it would be rather confusing because it would imply that God is the one that causes us to die,
Mm-hmm.
which we know is not true. It was the fall and it was sin. But here it says you turn people back to dust,
Mm-hmm.
saying return to dust, you mortals, which I could just see somebody saying that, well, God's the one condemning us. What are you talking about?
Yep. And that would still be true that God is the one who does condemn us. Ultimately, if we look back in Genesis chapter 3, the curse that he puts on Adam is that for dust you are and to dust you shall return. That's what Moses is referring to here, that Adam was made from the dust, and now God, as punishment, God is turning all people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. But we do see, that mortals, we have an end date. God does not. The other thing is, God does not have a start date. Unless you can get back to the beginning of everlasting, there's no beginning back there. Humans have a beginning, we have an end. God is immortal. We are but dust, small little specks in the whole grand scheme of things. And on top of that, 1,000 years can go by for God or for us, and God is like, oh, one day has passed. There is a huge separation between God and mortals. Mortals die at God's command. God is the one who controls all our lives, and nothing controls his. He is that dwelling place, that steadfast place that lasts forever. Now, Moses goes on and uses other ways in which he says that God is the one who causes people to die. He says, yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. And he goes, they are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. What reason then does Moses give to why God allows people to die?
He allows us to die because of the original sin of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, the original sin of Adam and Eve that dwells in us. But what else? Look at verse 8.
That would be our sinful Adam, I guess.
Yeah. It's not just, hey, because your great however many great grandfather Adam sinned, you now have sin in you, and so for that reason I'm gonna put you to death. No, you have placed our own iniquities in front of us, and on top of that, not only the ones that everyone knows about, but also the ones that we keep to ourselves, that no one knows about. You place everything in front of us and go, you can't really hide from me. Because of these, you are deserving of death. And so what does Moses ask the Lord to do for people? Get through all this. We are deserving of your wrath because of our sins. Even our best of our years are trouble and sorrow. And yet he asks God for something.
It looks like it would be in verse 12, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So the
Yep.
idea of just being purposeful with our time that we do have
Yeah.
and growing in our faith of understanding him.
Yep, that's definitely one of the things he is asking.
Wisdom in general.
Yep. Help us to number our days right so we can gain hearts of wisdom. Which, if you actually look later on in the next book of Proverbs, it starts out by saying, wisdom, the fear of the Lord is wisdom. So that's where we're getting to, is we're getting the heart of wisdom, a heart that fears the Lord. What else does he ask God to do for the people?
To be compassionate.
Yeah, to be compassionate on them, look on them with mercy, to know that we are but dust, and that one day we're going to return to the dust. So look on mercy during those times we are here on this earth. What else does he point out? Or what else does he ask for?
Well, by saying satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, it sounds like, when we rise each morning, let us be grateful and thankful that you've allowed us to wake up again.
Yeah, show us again, remind us again of your unfailing love every morning, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days, that we get to spend another day living for you. Even if our days are going to be terrible, as verse 15 talks about, make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us with. However many days you give to us, they're going to be awful. But make us glad during those days.
When I look, not that I'm intentionally trying to make mistakes, but if you have a good perspective about your mistakes, you learn from them, and therefore they're not, I mean, it's unfortunate, obviously, but you learn from them. So in a way, it's a positive.
Yeah.
Tell my kids that every day in the classroom.
Mhm.
Exactly. If you fail, that's how you learn. So
Yep. You learn by failing. Now,
well, and the
other
other cool
than-
thing is like when you do fail, that's when you realize you don't know everything anyway, and it kind of humbles you, which God wants us to be humble anyway. He doesn't want us to be arrogant, thinking that we can do everything without him. So
Yep. Yep,
Sounds
exactly.
like husbands.
I don't know about that
Hey,
one.
good. It sounds like what?
Husbands.
Husbands admitting that they need help.
What? We don't need help.
Eric's over here going, "We don't need help."
But what now, besides the fact that this is most likely the psalm that little James is talking about, what does this psalm have to do with the episode for today? Why might they have chosen to reference it during this episode?
Well, Mary and Martha at least, well, actually, and the disciples all needed that wisdom that they didn't have because it was in Jesus. Jesus said,
Yep.
I am the resurrection and the life. I can't remember exactly how he said it right before they left. But he said God's glory, something about God's glory.
Yeah.
I can't actually say it, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, he knows he's going to show God's glory. This is why I'm doing it. You don't know why right now
Mhm.
because your wisdom is not mine.
Yes, that's one good reason. Showing it for the people who were not dead. Yeah, you remember, hey, I know a lot more than you know. But who else might really gain a lot from hearing this song again, especially after this day?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking like maybe it's because aside from the ones that were there when Jesus raised the little girl, nobody else is able to fathom, even though they know that they're going to rise again in the resurrection, they don't fathom that because they're just not thinking big enough for them to
Yeah.
realize that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus right now. It's just
Yeah.
a failure of imagination on their part. They don't grasp it. So maybe he's doing it so that they can understand the fullness of his power of what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we see in all of the gospels, we see that he raises a total of 3 people that I could think of off the top of my head from the dead. He raises Jairus' daughter, he raises the son of the widow at Nain, and then he raises Lazarus. And that all happens before he raises himself from the dead. So 3 times he has given them examples of people he has raised from the dead, so that they could better understand that when he dies, he's going to rise again.
Do you think that the reason why Peter and who are the other two? Peter and Big James and no. Who were the other two that were with him for Jairus' daughter? I can't remember.
It was Peter, James, and John, and
And John.
James and John are the brothers.
Do you think the reason why they weren't outwardly saying Jesus is going to raise Lazarus is because Jesus, of course, told them to be quiet about it?
Yeah.
So they might have had an idea in their head, but they weren't coming out with it because they didn't know if they were able to say that yet, So,
Yep. Exactly. In fact, they weren't able to say it yet. Jesus said there's a specific time when you can say it, but it's not until that time. That hasn't happened yet. But who else might benefit from hearing this? So we've talked a lot about the people who are alive during this whole story.
ooh, his mom,
Yeah.
Jesus' mom, maybe? No?
Yep.
Or just
She would
everybody,
benefit from
all
hearing
the-
this, definitely. But there's one other person, we keep dancing around them, mentioning everybody else around them, but there's one person who would understand this psalm very closely. One person who was not alive during this whole story of Lazarus being dead.
I wasn't gonna say Rama.
Nope. Not
Like,
her.
he's not even in the,
Someone who is in the gospel account of John chapter 11.
but you
His
said
name-
he's not present at the resurrection at Lazarus? He's not present?
He's not alive before the resurrection of Lazarus.
He's not alive before the resurrection of Lazarus. I guess for us? No,
Well, it is for us, definitely, yes.
I don't know.
We're still dancing around the one person who might understand the sleep of death before the raising of Lazarus, and who would understand a little more to number his days aright because he has new life.
I don't know.
It's not Jairus's daughter because she's
No,
a woman.
nope, it has to do with this gospel account from John chapter 11 about the raising of
John the Baptist. Just kidding.
no.
Are we talking about Paul?
No,
No,
Lazarus.
Jesus.
Oh, he's talking about Lazarus.
Yes,
Oh.
the one person who wasn't alive before the raising of Lazarus was Lazarus. Lazarus was dead.
Oh,
And then he was
wow.
raised to new life.
Here we are talking about how the disciples didn't understand Jesus.
Yep, no, I was like, hey, those are great
And
points.
record it.
We're a great example. Mary, great example. But what about the guy who's been dead? Yeah,
Like, well,
because
his body was there.
he was dead.
Right.
His body smelled because he was returning to dust. And yet he was woken up in a new day. If he was to read this psalm, you cannot help but think that, you've got to number your days right, because you don't know when it's going to end. He thought it had ended when he died. But Jesus said, no, 4 days later, I'm going to raise you from the dead so that you can live a little bit longer. And that's sort of the idea, is that each day we wake up, we should have that same attitude that Lazarus probably now had, that he had been raised from the dead. Hey, I'm alive again. God has granted me a new day to live for him.
It is a really great reminder. I'm actually trying to convince Pastor Hein to get a matching tattoo that says every day is a gift of your grace in Spanish.
That'd be cool.
Would be, wouldn't it, Pastor?
Be. Could be. Not fully convinced. Not fully. But now, another person who we would eventually say would understand this just as well as Lazarus would be Jesus, when he would one day die and rise again. And that idea is prophesied about in Isaiah chapter 52 to 53. Now, we have looked at a portion of this section back in season 3, where we talked about Jesus being a man of sorrow, a man familiar with pain. But it's brought up again here. And so now we're going to just look at it entirely and talk a little bit more in depth about exactly what they were talking about, that Lazarus should have realized what this meant about Jesus, knowing that Jesus was the Messiah, and knowing that Isaiah is talking about the Messiah here, should have realized what was going to happen to his friend Jesus.
And
So
are you
it's-
saying that Lazarus should have recognized this before he died? Before Lazarus himself died, or after Lazarus was brought back, then he should realize that this is going to be about when Jesus dies?
No, Jesus is telling him, really, you and my disciples should have realized it from the moment I started talking and they believed that I was the Messiah. You should have realized, hey, this section is talking about the Messiah. Look what what it says is going to happen to him, and therefore they shouldn't be surprised when he dies and when all the things happen to him. But yet they aren't getting it that he has to die. And that's what's frustrating Jesus, is that everyone should really be looking at Isaiah 52 and 53 and going, oh my goodness, Jesus is going to die, but it's going to be okay because he's doing it for our salvation. But they don't get that.
Well,
Because
and
their
and
idea of the Messiah is messed up.
they even
Yeah.
kind of reference that in the show where after Lazarus has been raised, I think it was him actually. He was saying they were just stories and now they're about you. And so it's almost like, yeah, they hear all these stories and they learn all these lessons, but until it actually gets applied, it doesn't
Yeah.
really hit home.
Yeah, and that's what they're talking about. Jesus is referencing this passage saying, hey, you guys should have all realized it. And Lazarus goes, oh, I get it now. I understand it. I can't believe we missed it. And it's never really clicked with me until now that it's become real. And now Jesus is saying, well, now my disciples, I want them to realize this before it happens so that they're prepared. But I don't think it's going to happen. And so he's worried about them. And so that's his struggle at this point, is that he is frustrated that they aren't getting it because he knows what's going to happen because they haven't gotten it yet. That they are going to struggle with what's about to happen. So let's read Psalm 52 and 53. It's really just the last 3 verses of 52 that really introduces us to what it's going to be talking about, and that is the servant of the Lord. And this section is often called the suffering servant. And we'll see why as we read through it. So from Isaiah 52 to 53, see, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sins of many and made intercession for the transgressors. All right, so it talks about this servant of the Lord. does this describe that the servant of the Lord is going to be well liked?
No, he is going to be looked down upon.
Yeah, he's going to be looked down upon, definitely. But we also see that it talks about saying kings and nations will listen to him, which is an interesting thing. You got these two sort of sides going on at the same time, but for the most part, there is nothing about him that is going to be well liked. So now, though he was a man of suffering and familiar with pain, what did he take up?
Our transgressions.
Yeah, he took up our transgressions, and what else? Look at right away after that. He took up our transgressions. He took us, if you look at verse 4, surely he took up what?
Our pain and our suffering.
Yeah, even though he has his own pain and suffering, he takes up our pain and bears our suffering. And who was the one who punished this servant?
Well, on the next part of 4, it says we consider him punished by God.
Yeah, he was punished by God. And what did God punish him for?
Because once he took on our sins,
Mhm.
that's when Jesus says, why have you forsaken me?
Yep. Yep. It's this idea of he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. So it's all because of us that he was punished.
Yep.
I love the book of Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this part right here too.
Yep.
And it's interesting because the second half of 4 says we considered him punished by God, but he was punished by God because of our sin. So in a way, we kind of punished him, you know?
Yep. We are the ones who ultimately are the cause of his punishment. Exactly. Yep. And yes, then we go through this whole thing where it talks about how he is going to go through a lot of suffering because of our sins, and that ultimately he's going to be cut off from the land of the living. And then it is because of the transgression of us that he is punished. He's assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no evil, had no deceit. And this was the Lord's will. And yet, what will happen to this servant after he has died?
He will justify many, or are you talking about the raising? Or
It's,
raise up? Go ahead.
well, I'm saying you're right in both cases. It is that he will justify many, and that he will see the light of life. He will rise again. Even though he is going to die, he is going to rise again, and he will justify many, having taken upon himself their iniquities.
Is that what, when we say that we are justified, that definition of justified isn't saying, ha ha, we're right. That's how we would kind of use it in English. You're justified when you're right. But for this, it's because we believe in Jesus and he died for us. That's our justification.
This
Right.
is usually the word justification in the courtroom sense. You are justified when the judge declares you not guilty.
Gotcha. Okay.
The way that I was taught to remember what the word, when you see the word justify, how you are to understand it, it's just as if I've never sinned.
Okay. So then a Christian's justification doesn't equal being like seen as not guilty, right? Or would that?
No, it means that we are seen as not guilty by God.
By God.
It's
Okay.
just
Because
as
of
if
Jesus.
we never sinned.
Okay.
That's what the word justify means in the Bible. It means this idea of, it's as if God, when God looks at us, it's as if we had never sinned. We are
Every
declared
every
not
usage?
guilty.
And you said every usage of justify in the Bible or just this one?
Every time it talks about justification in the Bible, it's referring to declaring not guilty.
Right, because what's one of those, because when I don't remember, they'll say Christians are justified and sanctified, like I'm the justified and sanctified, and then I think there's another one where I always have to kind of slow my thought process down and make sure I'm like defining those words accurately,
Yeah, so justification is being declared not guilty.
right?
Sanctification is two senses. There are two different ways in which we are sanctified. We are made holy through baptism, which is a part of justification, but sanctification is also living that holy life.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, it says for this, the righteous servant will justify many, for he bore the sin of many. Do you know, what? Like, are they saying many as in lots of people, but not all people? Or is he just saying as a whole, it's gonna be a lot of people because it's all people? If that makes sense.
Or is it all the people who believe in Jesus?
Right.
Yep, it is going to be all people who believe in Jesus. Talks about many will be justified here. So there's going to be a large number of people who are going to be saved.
But he died for the sins of all, correct?
Yes, he died for the sins of the whole world, and many of them will be justified. Not all of them, many of them will be.
But it says he bore the sin of many also.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
So
they
he-
still
is
have
where
to,
you
they
get-
still have to come to faith.
Yeah, this is where you get into real interesting things. Where he bore the sin of many, but did he bear the sins of all people? It is interesting. All sins have been paid for, whether people believe it or not. However, like if you received a blank check in the mail, doesn't say who it's from, just says write down whatever amount you want. That's how much will appear in your bank account if you cash this check. Unless you actually go through with it and do it, that check is worth nothing. Same is true with God's offer of salvation. He has written a blank check to every human being on the planet who has been or ever will be, and says, here is your salvation. All you have to do is believe.
And so it would not be inaccurate for a Christian to say that Jesus came to justify to justify many or the world.
Mhm.
But like you said, if you turn away from that belief,
Yep.
then you don't get, yeah. So he
Yes.
did actually still come for everybody. But if they've chosen to turn away from him, then they don't get it. They're
Yes.
not.
Jesus came to justify many, or to justify all, but not all will be justified by Jesus.
Gotcha.
Because many will reject. And that's also where we get into this weird thing where it's Jesus says, few will enter through the narrow door, but many will enter into the wide gate that leads to destruction. But then we get verses like this where it says, no, many are going to be justified. And like, which one is it? Is it going to be many, or is it going to be a few? And the answer is it's going to be a lot of people from every tribe, language, and tongue beyond what anyone could number are going to go to heaven. But the same is also true on the other side. There are going to be many people who are going to go to hell beyond what we can number.
Still not quite sure I understand the, why it would say it that way in the Bible though, so we
Why
can
would
talk
it
about
say
it.
it this way in the Bible?
Well, what confuses me is that there's, both of those sentences have they mean different amounts of people, but it's the same word. They use the same word, many.
Yes.
That's why I'm looking too much into it.
Yeah,
Nope, nope.
it's too subjective, like many for one person might mean 20, but for another person, it might mean 100, and it's just kind of, it's
Yes.
subjective,
Mhm.
so
Well,
try not.
regardless, you saying Jesus died for all, which is what we believe and what the Bible says, but it says many here. So if many means all, then wouldn't it mean all for the next time it said many? Few verses later.
I think the reason why it says many is because so many other people turn away from Jesus. So it's like he's justifying only the ones that are accepting the faith of believing in Jesus, you know? He did justify everybody, but since most of them are turning away, the many that they're talking about here are just the believers. Right? I don't know. Did he go away?
Nope.
Oh, there
No,
you are.
I'm
Right
guessing.
here, I'm looking at, I'm trying to find any study notes or information that could help us understand a little bit better what is being said here.
Well, if Renee understands it, you can just tell it to me later and continue with the
Oh.
Bible. No, I'm just saying it's late. You can continue with the Bible study.
Listen, this is the last question.
Oh,
Oh,
is-
And now we're talking about whatever you guys want to still talk about. Let me just look. I'm gonna look at these two verses in the original languages to see if they are any different from each other to indicate, hey, there is a difference between what is being said here and what's being said there. Or if, see verse.
because I think that this still just points to the idea of the free will, you know? If
Mhm.
if somebody wants to exercise their free will and not believe in Jesus, God's not going to force them to believe. So, you know, the justification will pass them by.
Okay, I'm trying to remember. One more literal.
Why don't you find it later and email it to us?
Okay. So in the original Hebrew, it talks about how he will cause to be justified. Many.
Meaning giving them the faith,
Mm-hmm.
giving them the belief. Yep. It just doesn't talk about how many of those people he gave the belief actually follow through, like you said, with your analogy of cashing that check, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He will cause it to happen for many of them, but not everyone. Looking at
I'm
the
just
word that's used.
They use the same word in both of those sections when talking about justification versus.
But you're also looking at an English translation.
Yeah,
Right.
English is a
Why I'm
lot
asking about the
less.
Hebrew.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to see if 50. Nope, it's the same word in both places.
I would guess then if it's the same word, then maybe it's just something that's not really as not that we shouldn't worry about it, obviously. We want everybody to be saved, but there's nothing that we can't bring anybody else to believe. Maybe it's just something we're not supposed to.
I don't understand what's.
Something we're not supposed to understand.
Like, yeah, well, I don't know necessarily maybe understand, but maybe just not worry about it. You know, as long as I don't know, I'm not trying to, as long as we're believing.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously we do want to hopefully bring, you know, show people so that they can believe too. But unfortunately, it's not gonna happen for everybody.
Right.
Cause one way,
Go ahead.
this again, yeah, I get what your issue with this translation is, Emma. So in verse 11, we can say many, as in a part of the whole, a large portion of the whole, but not all. But from what I'm seeing in here too, it might be suggesting that the thing is a substantive, as opposed to an adjective. This is referring to just a large number, which can mean all.
Okay.
And so,
So it
You're-
could mean
you're-
large number or it could mean all. It could mean.
well, it's a
either.
large number that could mean all people. It's just a large number. It's not specifying an amount of many people. Well, there are many people in the United States. Am
But
I
also-
saying, well, there are many people, but not all of them are actually people? Not everyone in the United States is people. Or am I saying there's a large number of people in the United States? Well, I'm saying there's a large number of people in the United States. But I'm using the word many because it's a great number. So he bore the sins of many, of a great number of people, which includes everybody, can include everybody, but it doesn't necessarily always have to mean everybody. As we see with, he will justify many. It will be a great number of people, but it won't necessarily be everybody, but it could include everybody.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So I would say, basically, just to use a little bit of a math term to sort of help us understand what many means, it means, I would say it would mean more than half and less than or equal to the whole. If that makes any sense. So it's gonna be greater than 50%. Because it's gotta be, many is more than half of something, so many is more than half. But it's less than or equal to the whole, so it can't include everything. Or it could just be a little bit less. Hey, let me get out my whiteboard, Emma, so I can use the visual for
How
you.
about you do that for me at home, because I think it's after 9 and
Oh, is it after 9 already? Wow.
yeah,
Well, that was my fault because we got home so late, so I
nope,
apologize.
that was
Thank you
my
for
fault. I
being
asked the
flexible.
question. Thank you.
Oh,
But,
it's all good. I like getting into the nuts and bolts of the Bible. It's all good with me, so don't worry about it.
yep.
I,
All right, well, if there are no other questions, then we will call it a night, but if there are still questions. Yeah. Yes, Katie, what do you have?
yeah, his question is, why are you still there and it's after 9? That's his question.
Because I am answering questions, important questions.
Well, I appreciate you guys being willing to start later. I'll be better about it next week. So
That's fine, yes,
Hopefully
and
we'll have
next week
our back
we'll be
by
watching
next week.
episode 8.
yes.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about what we want to do for midweek Bible classes starting then, from then on, because there are no more episodes yet.
Right?
We can always go back and watch the Christmas ones, but I will leave that up to you guys to discuss at the end of next week's lesson.
Okay, thanks, Pastor. I appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
All right, have a good night. Bye, Emma.
Yep, you
Bye
guys-
guys, have a good night.
yep,
You too.
have a great night.